This is Basketball Talk 77, and today's video is part 2 of my series, Should the Rockets Trade James Harden or Russell Westbrook? Last video, we talked about James Harden and Russell Westbrook and their skills and weaknesses. And if you'd like to see that, click the top right corner of the video for part 1 of this series. Anyway, today we're going to be talking about trade scenarios for both players and which one has more trade value and possible teams that could be created from these trades. So, other than that, there's nothing more for an intro, so let's jump right in. James Harden is 1 year younger and more versatile than Russell Westbrook. Not to mention that Russell Westbrook is very limited as a player, and as we've seen in our graphic of the court, Russell Westbrook needs everyone around him to be able to shoot, or else he might have to have a double team in the paint as he tries to drive. So you need very specific personnel to have success with Russell Westbrook. That's why I see only really 2 teams being able to trade for him, which we'll get to later. Meanwhile, James Harden is a 2011-12 Sixth Man of the Year, which means although he's very ball dominant now and has lots of isolation, we know that he can be much less of a star and can be more of a sixth man, helping his teammates before scoring himself. Of course, this was a long time ago when he was still undeveloped, or at least less developed than he is now. However, this is still telling, in my opinion, that he can do it and can go back to that. And I think the lure of trying to win a ring will bring James Harden to his senses and make him realize that he doesn't have to be the best player on the team with the ball in his hands at all times. Anyway, let's talk about those 2 teams that could take on Russell Westbrook. They are, in my opinion, the Milwaukee Bucks and Golden State Warriors. Scenario 1, the Russell Westbrook-Steph Curry trade. This trade would involve Russell Westbrook going to Golden State and Curry then going to Houston. I see this trade as pretty unlikely. From what the Warriors are as an organization, and the fact that Steph Curry won 3 championships with Golden State, along with being a Golden State Warrior his entire career so far, I see it as highly unlikely that they would just trade him. Not to mention that Steph Curry is only 1 year younger than Russell Westbrook, so it's not like it's a rebuild opportunity. Even then, Golden State is one of those teams that really doesn't trade away their big pieces. They're kind of like the San Antonio Spurs in that way. Like how the championship-winning San Antonio Spurs never really traded people, or didn't trade a lot of people, mostly just drafted them or signed them. And so that's what created such a good culture in San Antonio, and it's done a similar thing in Golden State, as they really don't trade that many people, or at least they don't trade their big 3 Golden State Warriors for life, like Steph Curry, Draymond Green, and Klay Thompson. Durant was a different story since he'd only been with them for 3 years, so he wasn't as much of a Warrior as those other 3 were. So it's a different story. But from what I've seen, they really aren't a big fan of trading people they drafted. And they drafted Steph Curry, as we all know. So I see it as a bit unlikely that they're just going to trade him for a 1 year older guy that isn't very good at shooting. That's another thing. Steph Curry went 43.7% from 3 last year. And of course, this year he's only played 10 games, so he's a little rusty. But 43.7% last year. You know what Russell Westbrook did this year? 25.4% from 3. And considering the Warriors rely on three-point shooting, I'm not sure they're going to want to make a trade with one of the worst three-point shooting people in the entire league. So yeah, this trade is pretty unlikely. Let's look at another trade. The Westbrook Antetokounmpo trade. This trade would involve Russell Westbrook being sent to the Bucks for Giannis Antetokounmpo, who would then go to Houston. I also see this trade as very unlikely. Why would the Bucks trade a younger, more talented, more dominant, more versatile, better at shooting version of Russell Westbrook for Russell Westbrook? It just doesn't make sense. Besides, again, Giannis has been with the Bucks his entire career, and they've developed him, and they're probably not going to be like, oh, we spent millions of dollars, or not millions, but we spent a lot of money developing you and building a team around you, but you know what? We're just going to trade you now. It doesn't make sense, and they wouldn't do it. So, now let's look at some James Harden trades, because they're a bit more realistic. Let's look at scenario 1. The James Harden-Kristaps Porzingis trade. This trade would involve James Harden being traded for Kristaps Porzingis and either Tim Hardaway Jr. or Seth Curry. These players have high field goal percentages, and Kristaps Porzingis can shoot the three, which means he could fit in with the Russell Westbrook lineup, the one that has to have all shooters. And Tim Hardaway Jr. and Seth Curry are one of the highest field goal percentage shooters in the entire league right now. So they'd fit in too and would provide some depth for the Rockets. Look at scenario 2. By the way, that last trade might not happen because they might not want to trade. The Mavericks. They might not want to trade one of their best young players plus a good role player for an aging shooting guard, which they already have a shooting guard named Luka Doncic. However, they might want to go for it. We don't know. Anyway, let's just talk about our second trade, which is James Harden for Karl-Anthony Towns and D'Angelo Russell. And essentially, James Harden would be traded for Karl-Anthony Towns and D'Angelo Russell, who would then go to Houston. And James Harden would go to the Timberwolves. Again, this is a bit of an unlikely trade. Although the two would fit in, the Timberwolves would be trading both of their two best players for, again, aging shooting guard, which they might not even need. And they're really bad, so they might want to go for it, but it wouldn't really help them with a rebuild, so yeah, it's also pretty unlikely. This brings us to my favorite of these trades, and what I see as making the most sense, and this is the 3-team deal. Here's how it goes down. James Harden would be traded to the New York Knicks as the first step of this 3-team deal. Why does this make sense? Well, the Knicks, being a big market, would be able to offer James Harden a lot of money. Not to mention that James Harden might help the New York Knicks finally attract some big-name free agents. Because they've had a lot, and I mean a lot, of failures in the past. And a lot of them have probably been because they haven't had any good players to build upon. Now that they have a good player, perhaps big-name free agents, even like Giannis, might want to come. And that could seriously make the New York Knicks a contender, which is what they've always wanted. In the second step, the New York Knicks would send first-round picks and young players to the Washington Wizards. Why does this make sense? Well, the New York Knicks can't develop players, or at least they're not very good at it. And the Washington Wizards, who would be going into a rebuild, which I'll explain in a second, would like some first-round picks and young players to help them get their rebuild into action. Then, in the third step, Bradley Beal would be traded to the Rockets. Why does this make sense? Bradley Beal would become the co-star for Russell Westbrook. And this is why the Wizards would go into a rebuild. Again, we've heard reports the Wizards don't want to go into a rebuild and believe John Wall will come back healthy as ever. But it's really, anything could happen. he might come back and he might not be healthy, and we don't know what's going to happen. And honestly, this is really the story of it entirely, because we don't know. Perhaps the Rockets will have some success. And so I'm going to leave you with a few questions. And I also have to say, before I ask you those questions, I hope that Russell Westbrook gets healthy soon. If you haven't heard, he has tested positive for the coronavirus, and it would be horrible if he had lasting impacts on his health because of the coronavirus. So let's all hope he gets better soon. But anyway, I'll leave you with these few questions, and then I'll be the end of the video. And you can ponder them and answer them in the comments if you want. So, I ask you, do you think the Rockets are going to win a championship with the team they have right now? And should they trade James Harden, or should they trade Russell Westbrook? Or should they trade neither? And would any of these trades make the Rockets better? And which one is your favorite? Answer these in the comments, like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.